Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Bilingual Find Your Place podcast. Desiring to show that it is possible to make unpopular choices, even out of the norm, and be happy, wishing to prove that happiness comes from choosing yourself rather than giving in to popular pressure, I receive people who have made the best of a situation that put them in the different box. My name is Stephanie Bergo, and I'm the host of this show. I've been working as a potential catalyst for more than 10 years, and my mission is to allow people to give themselves the right to be all that they are, and thus believe that their dreams are achievable. Welcome to these interviews. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Find Your Place podcast. I have the grace this morning to be with LiYing Lim, with accepted my invitation. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you, my love. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, morning for me and afternoon for you, because we're apart in the world again. I'm in Montreal and you're in Scotland. Right before I'm gonna start right there, right before we start the recording, we've talked a bit about your life, and you told me you were born in Malaysia, you've traveled, you even came to Montreal and Old Quebec a couple of years ago, and now you live in Scotland because you found love there, I think you told me. So what brings you to travel at that level? Like, why did you move from Malaysia and how come you came to Quebec? Just a bit.
Okay. Well, it's quite a story because I was born and raised in Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur, and I actually come from a Chinese full like pure Chinese descent. So my
Mm.
heritage is Chinese, and growing up in Malaysia, I've honestly never really felt like I was at home. I always felt a bit like a black sheep. I had a lot of big dreams in my head, and I always looked outward, um, and believing that the outside circumstances will give me happiness. And that was probably one of the biggest inspiration for me to travel a lot in my life. So I actually studied in Manchester in the UK for a couple of years, and when I graduated I went back to Malaysia, took up a position as a marketing manager, which I honestly hated so deeply. Like I had
Mm.
the worst depression ever when I was in that job. And after a year doing that, I told myself, you know what, I can't see myself doing this forever. I'm going to really pursue what I truly want to be. And that was a writer. And so I kind of looked at what was available in Malaysia, and I had a very specific idea of where I would be working at. And it was a magazine called Harper's BAZAAR. It's an international title. And I knew I just want to work there. Unfortunately, they didn't have any vacancies. But I told myself, you know what? Whatever it is, I'm gonna get in there. And I ended up becoming one of their oldest interns. I was working in the beauty department, just helping out the editor with all the stuff. And I started from just cleaning the storeroom, doing intern things, to really helping her to start to write some stuff because she was overwhelmed with a lot of work. So upon doing that, my writing was discovered by the editor in chief, and I started to write more and more, and I got more assignments, and I was assigned to certain things. I got to travel to Beijing to cover a story with the actress Gong Li, and then after that, coming back, I was like, okay, maybe they will give me a job. But unfortunately, there was no vacancy. So I decided to apply for a residency in Paris, actually, in France. And I went to Paris for a couple of months. When I was there, I actually fell into a really deep hole of anorexia. I already had a form of anorexia when I was working in a magazine, and when I actually literally came back from university, it just started to develop. It was a real disorder that started to be developed because, to be honest, I wasn't mentally well. I was in a depression. I was lost and confused. I got out from my first relationship thinking that to be perfect meant that I needed a perfect appearance. That actually destroyed the relationship at that time. And so when I was in Paris alone and being in a city that I loved, I actually became more and more reclusive. And eventually I dropped, my weight actually dropped to the lowest point, which was about 32 kilograms at that. And because I was so obsessed with losing weight, I wasn't eating much and I was walking around Paris a lot. So I wasn't taking any public transport. So I was just literally walking from one point to another around Paris. And when I got home, I actually injured my foot. So I literally broke the bone in my left foot. And when I got home and landed, I remember my mom literally cried. She fell to her knees at the first time I've seen my mom cry, and she told me to look for help, to really go see a doctor. And that was the beginning of my semi-recovery, 10 years of hanging on all kinds of different eating disorders because I wasn't in a mentally well state to actually recover. I always wanted to have control over my body as a form of control over my life, which you all
Yeah.
know is never really possible. And yeah, during those times, I traveled a lot on my work because I eventually got a job at the magazine, and the work took me to a lot of places. And then eventually, I got a job offer in Hong Kong as well. So my work on the outside looked amazing. Like people were like, "What the hell? Like, why would she be unhappy with her life?" But actually, I was slowly really dying inside. And when I was in Hong Kong, I decided to take up a residency again, a writer's residency to Vermont. And that was how I ended up just on a whim, like, why not moment of just crossing the borders to Quebec. And that was how I visited Montreal and Old Quebec. And then coming back, I realized I want to be committed to my full recovery. I really want to be fully recovered from my eating disorders. And so that was really quite a catalyst for my recovery. And then from there, my spiritual journey began, really. Yeah.
That's
Long
very interesting.
answer.
But it's very interesting because eating disorder is very severe and it's very central. I remember I used to be a gymnast and I've been lucky enough not to have a real disorder, but it has been consideration for years because, you know, you're like in a sort of a swimsuit in front of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people, and you're growing into that woman while you're doing sports. I started gymnastic. I was 6 years old and I stopped. I was almost 30 after having my daughters and everything. I went back and it was much it was my passion, that sport, but nonetheless it was very it was always at the back of my head, like kind of being careful. And I think doing that sport for so many years helped me like take a different trail, because I saw much of my friend who stopped gymnastic like in teenage years, or and then your body started changing. Because I've got injured, and during one summer I had no breast, and then at the end of the summer I had a lot, and I gained weight, and I like the forms are because a level of too much sports
Yes.
reduce the changing of the body. So when you're injured and you stop for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, change occurring, and then it scared me, and I was like, okay, so I gotta be really mindful to what I look. And finally I did well, I did recall that. So and I don't know for you in Malaysia, but here in Quebec, it's a subject, like people talk about it, like there's association to help you, there's some stuff. So I've been aware before it became a problem. And as you were saying, I took control on my life on other level, because it was clearly a thing about I can manage my own self with this. So I'm very impressed. that's an amazing path, and it's very difficult to go through that. And I think, as you said, the catalyst, and it's same for the same for sickness than it is for the rest. I often say that responsibility is the key to anything.
Definitely. I truly loved what you said there about, the awareness that you already had and you were able to extricate yourself from going deeper into that situation. I think because honestly, to have suffered from eating disorders for 10 years was mainly because I didn't have an awareness of that. I know, if I look back on the time, I felt that there was some parts of it was very much glorified in the field that I was working in. I was
Mm,
acknowledged for being skinny. I was acknowledged for being able to fit into any clothes, I wanted to. And then when I started to get into recovery, um, the nutritionist wasn't even trained in dealing with eating disorders. Like
mm,
in Malaysia, it's not something we even talk about, and
mm,
it's a very common thing in the Asian culture to be really skinny, and people don't even bat an eyelash when a woman says, "Oh, I'm not gonna eat at all today. I'm gonna have a complete water fast," or that I only eat a baked potato every day. Like people are like, "Oh, that's amazing. No wonder you're so slim," and people
mm,
glorify that. And so when I finally became aware of it, it was really, really, really because I felt really alone in my life. I felt
mm,
like I couldn't have a relationship with anyone because I was so scared of socializing, of being asked to eat something I didn't want to eat, or having that pressure of feeling fear of food all the time. And I remember when I was recovering and I was in old Quebec and I was walking around alone and I was taking pictures. I remember at that point in my life, because when you put on weight again, you start to bloat and you will carry that excess weight for a while because your body is
yeah,
getting into
scared that you start again to fast,
exactly,
clearly.
exactly. So I kind of knew that going in already. I did my homework. I was like, I know this is gonna happen. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I got in touch with people who were on the recovery road as well. So that was the first time I really felt like I wasn't really alone in this, and I know that this is gonna happen. But during that year, I literally just kept away from everyone. I didn't take much pictures of myself. I didn't meet anyone. It was a very beautiful, kind of like a very beautiful journey when I look back on it. And I think as a woman, if I could just say one thing is that I'm so glad that I had that moment for myself because that's truly a journey of finding myself and and then going forward what's going to come. And that was when all the beautiful spiritual awakening came forward to me, and I was able to make the decision I had to make to become who I am today. So
Mm.
yeah, that's
That's very impressive because it's like building small evidence that even though you're not seeing it right now, it's gonna come, and that you have the strength and the power over whatever you want to do. And at that time, it was recovering because you've been in that cycle for many years. And at that time, you decided that now it was the time. And that's so precious because you were telling it at the real beginning when you were saying like it was the outside world telling me whatever, like if I'm okay, if I look good, if I
Mhm.
and it's a real challenge to go from there to being your own judge and decide whatever you want to do. And clearly there's many layer to eating disorder. You
Yeah,
said like the food is one thing, but it's exactly as another dependency, Like
Yeah.
for people, it's alcohol, for others, it's drug, but it's like deeply um a way of feeling like you felt empty, you were like not feeling well, you were questioning yourself, your abilities, your so it's very, very difficult. And then you were already saying it, but the part about social life, you don't feel like you belong, you're a bit scared of what you're gonna do or not do. And what I see is a lot about boundaries, like you didn't knew yourself very well, or
Yeah,
which so you were scared and you removed yourself from the outside world.
that's right.
That must have been a real path to go back to where you're at today.
It's yeah, I mean, now that I'm retracing back that journey to that girl, that version of me, I was alone a lot. And you're right, you know, I was always very I was a big people pleaser. I would make sure that I said the right thing. I could change my energy to fit somebody, fit a room. And if I wasn't approved, I would always have this voice in my head telling me, oh, you've got to work harder then. Or if I got something done really well, it would be work harder because you got to be better than this version of yourself, you know. And that was what I grew up with. And to be honest, I had a, you know, outwardly, my family is very normal. It's not like I grew up in a, you know, like an abusive childhood or whatever. I was
Mhm.
the eldest in the family. I had two younger sisters. If anything at all, it would have served me to be the a really healthy child. But I think, you know, I have to say this because growing up, I remember the earliest memory I ever had, I just felt really alone. And I think for me now, I understand it as something that comes from really even before I was born. And this is something I found truly liberating because now I can tap into those dimensions and feel into the connection I have with my ancestors. And these are things that I was able to move into eventually, but at that time, I didn't have a sense of belonging. Like I always felt like I needed to try so hard to belong somewhere. And even then, it feels like, when will this end? It's like if I had achieved something or if I had a relationship I've always dreamt of, I always had this at the back of my mind, like, when will this end? Because you're not worthy of it. What if they find out that you're not good for this?
Mm.
And that
Imposter syndromes.
Oh yeah, and it it always presented itself in my mother's voice, and my mother raised us in a way she knew how to. Like I have a beautiful relationship with her now, but back then I honestly really didn't. I really had a really tough, difficult relationship with her. Um, and I always felt like she raised us in a way that felt very protective. Like she would tell us things like, you know, for example, like, don't be too close to your friends because one day they're gonna backstab you, you know, things like
Mm.
that. Or like, you know, money doesn't grow on trees. You gotta save up. You gotta make sure you've got everything you need before you give it to someone else. And
Mm.
I always felt very like I wanted to rebel against it. I'm like, no, that's not true. And but at the same time, I was very eager to please my mother. I was very eager to be the beautiful, perfect daughter. And so even in the days when I was anorexic, I will remember her voice, like, you know, you've got to lose a couple of pounds to fit into the dress, or like, why did you put on some weight? You've got to lose it again so that you look pretty for girls or boys or whatever. And so when I was going through my therapy, I went through what really opened me up to tapping inside of myself was actually hypnotherapy with a hypnotherapist at a time. um, I had that big major moment that I realized that I needed to forgive that voice, which was my mother, and had
Mhm.
this beautiful reset. It was almost like a neural pathway reset of the entire thing. And then that was when I started to really allow myself the room to do what I truly want to do. But even then, Stephanie, like, I I think it really takes full self-responsibility, meaning that you don't put that on someone else to say, like, because I did that, I was like, it's because of my mother that I was like this. It's because of
Mm,
my mother that I grew up like that. But eventually, what was so powerful for me as a transformation was to say, she only knew what she knew. And she
exactly.
was probably raised that way as well. And that's what she said, and that's how it was passed down. Who am I today, and who do I desire to be has nothing to do with what she was and what she did to me. And that was when I started to really come into my power, and I started to realize who I was for the first time. And then, like you said, actually have boundaries, because I was honestly, literally changing myself for anyone, friends, parents, it's boyfriend even.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
I have the impression there's also a part, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm not very familiar with Malaysian culture, but Asian culture, from what I know, is like first you seem to add a cultural pressure also, like always belonging well, always being the good person. And what I know from Asia
Mm,
is, like, for example, women are not invited to express out loud their emotion and to, for example, be mad. And so everything,
yeah.
even in the culture, has to fit in that box. And
Mm.
when you're not the type of person fitting in those boxes, you have difficulty belonging.
Yeah, definitely. That's absolutely true. It's not a pretty sight to be angry. We're always told, like, don't show them your real emotions. Just everything is cool, everything is perfect. Maintain your perfect look. Like, it's very common in the culture. Definitely, definitely.
In Quebec, also another level, and not only for women, but, like, for example, we're often compared Quebec, because it's French, from France to France, and like French people are much more boiling. Like if they're mad, and sometimes they're not, like they're fighting against an idea just for
Yeah.
fun, because they want to challenge the other one. In Quebec, we're much more into the main idea. We're gonna follow, like, the lead and
Mm,
stuff like that. So we see that also, and it's, I think, there's none better than the other, because you have to build other stuff depending on where you're from and what you've learned. But
mm,
I often say that every individual comes with a world map, and that personal map comes from your parents, your culture,
mm.
whatever you done, your eating disorder, your friends you had,
Yeah.
your, like, learning of to go uh, through other people, to go see them, to, like, for example, my son, I have 3 kids, and my son is hypersensitive, and with Grace, because of him, I had to reconnect to my own emotions, because I
Mm,
remember clearly when I was much younger, I closed them. It was very violent. I was super sensitive too. And finally, for years, I thought I was very tough. And today, now that I've reconnected, you see me often with water in my eyes, because
mm,
I'm impressed for something, because I'm sad for something I have no control over, because, but it took me that to realize, because he was, for example, he was super small and he was melting, and I was like,
mm.
what am I gonna do with him? Like, I'm like, I, in my head, and same, you're talking about your mother's voice,
Yeah.
and I had my father's voice for
Mm,
long in my head, because he's owning his stuff very
yeah.
much. He's
Mm,
very interesting. But I was like, for example, if I was crying, it was like, okay, that doesn't give you any help or tricks. So crying for me was a feeling of being what's the word?
Reprimanded or rejected.
Yeah, or and not strong.
Mm,
Like, like being able not to cry was being strong, and
yeah.
finally it took me years to realize that, oh my god, first, that's not true.
Mm,
Second, it's very important to be able to live whatever you feel inside, and my son was the catalyst for that, because I needed to connect to him to make sure he was safe and he felt free. But in my, like, for example, even my older daughter, they were crying, I felt so bad, and I was like, oh my god, okay, so now they're crying, and the messages in my head were like, okay, pack your shit, stop that, do
mm,
whatever it takes, like, to get out of that state. And finally I've
mm.
learned. So everyone had to learn some stuff to become a better version, and it's still the case. I think we're gonna evolve until the end. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully. I hope I will.
Definitely. Oh, I'm devoted to my own evolution. I even now that I'm doing the work that I do as a Chadao ceremonial keeper, and I mentor women to live on purpose in their authentic power. I always say that. I say to them, like, I am a constant evolution. I do not seek to tell you who you are, because you are completely evolving at every moment, even while we're speaking. And so I think it's important, and this is really actually my life's mission, is to share that we are cosmic beings having a human experience. So we have to, how we can live in a limitless way is to accept the fact that we are limitless and tap into that limitlessness, but at the same time walk in the duality of the fact that we are human, and our emotions here are meant to show us the way. They are here to be to be in the fluidity, so that it communicates the language of our soul to us, because emotions tell us a lot of things through our body. And I think why I feel this so much is because I was so disconnected from my body for a long time. And when I started to feel again, I literally remember I felt like I was moving in my body the first time I felt that sensation again. I honestly know that, wow, a life lived super attached to your mind and your logical mind is so strenuous. It
Mm.
feels hard. It feels like a struggle because we think that we're alone here. But when we work with our faculties, we learn to tap into our emotions here and feel. That's when we transmute the energy into pure potential, because now you're really, wow, honestly, you're like all faculties talking to each other. You're not like stuck. You're actually tapping into even something that your mind doesn't even understand. And I love that, because the body, it's interesting, because now that I'm working with this all the time, I'm always I will be in a situation and I'll be like, if I say something like, I'll have to think about it, I just know it's a no. Because if it's a full yes, I would
Yeah,
say yes even when I don't know, you
yeah,
know. I don't know what's gonna
totally.
happen with Stephanie, but I'm gonna say yes anyway, right? It's that kind of
Yeah,
feeling, instead of like, I need to think about it.
yeah,
And
clearly,
you have to, if you have to make excuses or reasons why you need to do it, it's not a yes. It's not a yes. So
totally. I'm the same. I feel it very interesting because with eating disorders, you've been aware of your body for years and years and years in a probably negative way. And then
mm,
you build something magical out of it because now you're very connected to your body and you help people
mm,
and women to do so. From another side of that, like coin, if you want, you've learned to use that faculty to be really connected to now create something beautiful. It's amazing and it's super interesting. So now you were telling me you have a bit, well, you live in Scotland and
mm.
you have a business, you do that with women. Is it very much I'd say, for example, it's a bit spiritual, Here
Mm.
in Quebec, there's like spirituality, but not too much. And if you're in this, well, if you're in communities like that, it's open and everything. How is it in Scotland? Is it like all open or?
Ooh, interesting. So, I don't know if you're familiar, but there is a huge witches persecution history here in Scotland.
Oh,
So there was a
wow.
king who
No.
burned witches at the stake at one point. So most of the witches, I think there were hundreds of witches who died under his reign. So the word witch evokes a lot of different emotions. I personally identify as a witch because I work with plants. I work with the spiritual
Energy.
realm and the wisdom of the body and ancestral wisdom and energy. Yes, so
Mm,
I would say I'm very open about that, but as a conversation point in general, not really. And also,
mhm.
I noticed that a lot of times here, yes, there are communities, there are like women's circles, and there are yoga studios popping up everywhere. But the idea of something that's a lot more spiritual, it's something that holds a fascination, but I
Mm,
don't see enough of it. I feel like the online world is really where I thrive, and that's where I'm at most of the time because
mhm.
I connect with everyone around the world, and the people here. I think there's still that shadow of what was done to
Yeah,
witches and women.
clearly.
Yeah.
Mm,
So I notice a lot of that happening where women have that fascination. They want to dive into that, but they are afraid of saying that in public, especially around men. Um, so it's interesting to witness that, definitely.
yes, it's like entering a small door to get to a world with
Yeah.
n- endless possibilities. And
Yes.
it feels a bit the same here. Not that we had witch history. We're not that far from Salem though, so it's something we've heard about and we learn. And
Mm,
now there's much more women that are claiming that state of being a witch and really connect to her body. And when you think about it, and I honestly, for myself, I don't know exactly where I stand about that. I know that a couple of years ago, I studied in neuroscience, and uh,
mm,
at the same time in that class, first we were talking about all the quantic field, but in a
yeah.
scientific way.
Yeah.
So knowing that it exists and that there's so many registered fact about it was important for
Mm,
me. And at the same time, I met, I call her my magic friend. She does like quantic healing and stuff like that. And I trusted her, and she was my small door to get into that type of work and like connecting the body with the mind. I've always been in my head a lot, very, very brilliant, but very constrained to hear. And she's helping me see new stuff, and I feel it's very, very interesting. So I don't know about how I would define myself, but truly that path made me realize how powerful women are. Like I've
mhm.
had 3 kids. You're able to give life. That's
Yeah.
just that is honestly crazy. They
Is
are the most beautiful thing I've ever made. And I'm like, okay, so you're able to do those. That's
yes.
so it's magical. There's something about woman's body, woman connection that is very special. And I find it amazing that you're doing that. I find also that the online world, as you were saying, gives you access to people alike. You were talking about not
Yeah.
feeling like you fit in. I've
Yeah.
had this feeling for years also. I was like, and it's super funny. I had a party last week because we're all turning 40 this year.
Ooh.
So we see old friends, and it was fun because I had a discussion I wasn't waiting for with old friends I haven't seen for years for some of them. And they were like, already when we were 13, 14, we knew that you were special. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll come. And they were like, you were already inclusive, you were already all about people, you were already defending others. And I was like, okay. So at that time for me, I was a misfit because I was always like in conflict for some stuff, but it
Mm.
felt just and true for me. So hearing that 2 weeks ago, I was like, oh my God. So now with the adult vision,
Yeah,
it's because at that time it was, I felt it more like jealousy, envy, frustration and stuff. So I felt misfit at that time. And the more I grow, the more I get older too, the more I get those conversation with those people and heal some stuff I've been believing. They're not believing that for years. They haven't thought about me as
exactly.
whatever, but I've been building some stuff that restrained me to go forward about stuff we were telling ourselves and they were saying when we were 14, 15.
Mhm.
Clearly we have to come out of that. And you were
Yeah,
talking about responsibility. It's like every day I take on new responsibility on being truly myself. And the online world helped me a lot too, because I feel we're able to connect to people like you. For example, I only wrote a small message saying like I'm looking for people that has a nice spot
yeah,
and that want to share to come on my podcast, and you said yes, and now we're having this amazing conversation and we're building bridges across the Atlantic on stuff we both love and
that's
feel
right.
that that's
Eh,
incredible.
which is really something I love talking about this because it really is what we call the age of Aquarius. We are living in the age of Aquarius where we're talking about innovation, we're talking about evolution and technology helping us to transcend space, which is something I have been able to, and I'm so grateful for witnessing because when the pandemic hit, I wasn't able to serve tea the way I was taught traditionally to serve, and I had to find means to reach people. And the only way through was really on Zoom, or a live session through the screen. And that was when I started to get feedback from people saying that, oh my God, that was so magical. Like I can feel and I can sense my ancestors are coming through. I can feel spirit all around me. I can hear tea spirit talking to me. And that was when it got me like, this is interesting.
Mm.
What is there that I'm tapping into now? And so I had to consciously step into that space and say, I'm ready to be wowed, and I don't want to have any preconceived notions of what I can do anymore. Just use me, spirit, use me as a vessel, and share your wisdom with the world. And so that has been conducive in my work. And I started in tea ceremonies. I literally started just serving tea ceremonies. Um, and eventually I found that it helps women so deeply, and I actually got into so this is something I always say, like the Tao opens up a lot of doorways, and it's our decision again to lead ourselves through those doors. And so the Tao actually led me to what is known as bioenergetic, and I actually resonate to with what you're saying about the quantum healing, the quantum field, the unified field. That resonated so deeply with me. And when I was exposed to bioenergetics, it gave me words to explain what I was experiencing. It gave me words to explain why I felt my channels were opening and I can feel the universe moving in. And I was able to take that into a teaching to get people to understand, oh, I'm the cosmos, I'm the universe. How can I open up my gateway through the faculties of my mind, my breath, and my body? So that's part of my work with women, and it's when we take it into ceremony that the spiritual element comes in to help us, to guide us, that I call it a non-verbal transmission, because I'm not there telling them, okay, this is how you are like, and this is how you're going to fix it. It literally
Mm,
is something bigger than us moving through. So
really.
that's the source energy that supports us. And that's why when people often ask me, like, how do you have so much energy to do this work? I'm like, I plug into something bigger than me.
Mm.
It's not all me. And, we can go a lot more woo than that. But I think as humans, we have so much potential that we haven't even tapped into. And the minute, like you said, the minute you tear down those walls that you put up when you were 14 or 15 or even younger, that's when you start to see and get into a higher state of consciousness, basically. And that's when you go straight up to your vision, the unstoppable vision you've always held. Is not impossible anymore. And that's where you start to live a fuller and richer life, even in the unknown. Because
Yeah,
honestly, we
totally.
are in the unknown all the time, right? Most of the time. You can't even tell in the next hour what's going to happen to us. It's the truth. It really is.
Totally. Totally. And it's very impressive. One of my mentor always say, find
Mhm.
evidence where there's none. Like I think to start, when you really begin your path, I needed to have evidence, and that's why I did the podcast. It's because I found evidence in random people and friends and family and stories. I was like, okay, so if she did it or if he did it,
Yeah,
I might be able to. And that was my strength. But coming to a level where we're shoulder to shoulder, she likes to say, and I'm like, oh wow. And sometimes I don't find evidence at first for something I want, and I still continue. So it's building evidence one step at a time to create your own belief that everything is possible, and I find that's very magical too.
that's right. I love what you said, because I think oftentimes we're so constrained by the evidence, right? It's so funny. The other day I was having this talk about, okay, I wanted to address something that a lot of people ask me all the time. They always tell me, like, I just want the universe to show me something to prove that I'm on the right path. And then I said, if you are asking the universe to show you something to prove that you're on the right path, that proof is already the manifestation of your energy. Then obviously when it's manifested in that state of mind that you're having, that would be congruent to your energy level, which is dipped here because you're not believing in your manifestation. So obviously you will end up saying, it's a vicious cycle, but it's true, you would just end up saying, well, that didn't work. I just kind of knew it didn't work.
Yeah,
See, I'm proved. It's the proof. Is I'm right,
exact.
right? So I love the work that I've been exposed to in doing the work of working with plants, working with ancestral wisdom, working with the faculties of what I said, mind, body, and spirit integration, because we are now working in the invisible realm. We're working with something that is bigger than us, but it's absolutely us. We forget this. The physical body is a compression of energy. If we start to go into the bigger scale of our energy body, which
Mm,
is right out there,
yeah.
we are actually tapping into something that we haven't even seen evidence of. By the time it comes into reality, it's our projection. So if we could tap it at this level in the
Mm,
subtle body and make sure that there's no wobble and distortion, when by the time it comes through, it's exactly what we desire. It's exactly what we have envisioned. So our work is to stay the course. Our work is to hold that frequency, to anchor in that vision, that truth of who we are. And I found that working with tea, communing with tea, really has allowed me to become so guided, so embraced, so held in even the darkest moments, even in the void, even in the times when we call it true surrender or
Yes.
disintegration. Like, I don't know anymore who I am. Why is everything falling away? I have absolutely gone through those times, and all through that, T was able to guide me in a way where it was just so divine, so when you work with plants in that way, it really opens up a lot of doorway to our own true essence, which is in harmony with Mother Nature. So yeah, it's a really beautiful way of tapping in, for sure.
Totally. Oh my God. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. It was so interesting. I could have talked with you for hours. Thanks
Oh,
for your time today. It
thank
was very
you.
precious.
Thank you for
Very.
having me, my love.
Thanks everyone for listening or watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to write those down. I'm gonna answer them, and if it's for LiYing, I'm gonna share with her to make sure that you get the answer you want. Thanks. Come back next week. I'm gonna be happy to see you
You.
again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Come back next week with another guest that has a fascinating story to tell and that will inspire you to take action towards your own path. If you like this show, I'm inviting you to leave a 5-star review. That way, it helps us to spread the work and fulfill our mission even more. The podcast is also available in a video format on YouTube. You'll find it under the same name, Trouve ta place, Find your place, under Catalyseur de Potentiel. Let's connect on social media. You'll find me as Stéphanie Bergo or Catalyseur de Potentiel on Facebook or Instagram. Have a great day.